All right. Good morning, everyone. Great to see all of you today. My name is Geoffrey Macdonald. I'm the Bangladesh Country Director and Senior Advisor at the International Republican Institute, which is a democracy assistance NGO headquartered in Washington, D.C., with field offices around the world. And our organization promotes democratic institutions and values in various global settings. And a strong focus of our work in Asia and across the world is on youth political participation. And our panel today will examine youth political expression and activism from a comparative and a theoretical perspective, as well as bring a practitioner's view to the issue, discussing the practical ways to encourage youth political participation. Everyone on this stage today has both led research projects on youth participation, as well as implemented programs to inspire and capacitate youth to participate in politics. So we'll bring this dual perspective as researchers and practitioners to the discussion. Framing our topic today on political participation is the worrying state of global democracy. And I'm sure we'll come back to this topic over and over again over the next few days. In Asia, democratic backsliding, foreign authoritarian influence, ethno-religious divisions, and other factors are undermining democracy. Data from Freedom House shows this global trend, which is represented in many Asian countries. Young people in Asia constitute a potential bulwark against this trend, but face important and significant challenges. The next generation of Asia's politicians, activists, and civic leaders are entering politics at a time of divisive identity politics, populist ideology, digital innovation and manipulation, and global great power competition. And so the panels today and in our discussion will explore how young people see this intersection of global, regional, and domestic politics, what explains the differing levels of youth participation in various settings, how do young people engage in political activism, and how do they use the internet to express their political views and organize movements. To address these topics, our panel will have 4 presentations, including 3 case studies. Steve Cima, Senior Advisor at IRI, will discuss the state of youth politics in Asia, some of IRI's programming to encourage youth participation in political and civic life, and present a theoretical framework for a research initiative to understand the drivers of political disengagement. Korvi Rakshand, the Executive Director of the JAAGO Foundation in Bangladesh, will discuss the role of youth in Bangladesh, their political developments, and the challenges facing youth participation in the country. Jason Wee, the co-founder of Architects of Diversity in Malaysia, will discuss youth public opinion and the state of youth activism in Malaysia. And Yunju Chen, a researcher from Doublethink in Taiwan, will discuss the Chinese influence in Taiwan, youth public opinion, and some of Doublethink's work to mobilize youth through social media. My job will try to keep all of our presenters to 10 to 12 minutes. I have my phone out to keep everyone on a timer, so we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So I encourage you all to think of some questions while the presenters are speaking. With that, I'll turn it over to Steve to start us off.
Good morning. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Steve Cima. I'm IRI's Senior Advisor for Asia, based in IRI's regional office in Taipei. I also oversee IRI's Burma programming, which we run now from the regional office in Taipei. Prior to working in Taiwan, I have served as IRI's country director in several countries across Southeast Asia and South Asia. As Jeff mentioned this morning, I'm going to briefly speak about IRI's work to promote youth political participation in Asia, specifically an ongoing research project that will inform the design and implementation of IRI's youth outreach programs. Before I get started, I want to just talk about some of the opportunities and challenges that we see in IRI's youth programming across the region. I don't think any of these will be a real surprise to any of you, but just want to touch upon these. Among young people, there remains a positive opinion about democracy as a governance model, an increase in informal forms of participation, which are outside the electoral process, and formal political institutions being driven by advances in information and communication technology. Oh, okay. Yep. Cool. All right, sorry about that. Political parties started by young leaders in Southeast Asian countries, including the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, are hoping that discontent with the status quo will help them grow and get a chance to change politics as usual. And then just touching also upon the large youth population across the region. Development can be accelerated when the majority of youth in any country can make significant contributions to economic, social, and political life. Challenges that we see across the region. Among young people, there are growing concerns about democracy's ability to deliver, which have led to declining youth voter turnout, membership in political parties, and trust in political institutions. As we've talked about in the panel yesterday and was mentioned by Jeff, political rights and civil liberties have declined across the region as authoritarian forces have moved to consolidate power. We can look at reports from Freedom House and others that signal this trend. And then also just sizable youth populations. Obviously, this is a challenge as well. Progress and prosperity are held back when countries cannot meet the basic needs of youth. IRI's youth programming focuses on equipping youth, young people with the skills and networks to engage in civic and political processes. IRI delivers youth programs through its country programs and the Institute's youth networks, including Generation Democracy and the European Democracy Youth Network. When we look at our youth programs across Asia, we see a need for them to be better tailored to specific segments of the population, focused on the issues and topics most relevant to them, and the use of communication mediums most relevant to them, or most relevant to the audience. And so basically what we're looking at across the region is how do we better tailor our youth outreach programs? Basically, youth should not be treated as a homogeneous group. To address this issue, IRI has initiated a research project that seeks to enhance youth participation in civic and political processes by better understanding their attitudes towards political participation and factors contributing to passivity, and applying those insights into IRI's outreach initiatives. IRI is exploring ways to better use public opinion surveys and analyze data using advanced techniques, analyze youth political passivity, including defining youth engagement and analyzing the root causes, using predictive analytics to develop actionable analysis to inform programming, identifying specific groups of disengaged youth with different profiles and motivations, and engaging identified groups with messaging online and offline. The goals of the project are to identify disengaged youth, identify the reasons they are disengaged, identify other characteristics about them, such as demographic, lifestyle markers, commitment to democratic values, and identify ways to motivate them to get engaged, with engaged being defined as registering to vote, turning out to vote, engaging in conventional political process or activities, and otherwise participating in the political process. As part of our research, the primary sentiment we are trying to identify is youth disengagement from the political system, which we interpret as political non-participation. We anticipate identifying high and low degrees of non-participation with a range of turnout probabilities, including those who are not registered at all. We will explore correlations on whether non-participation is associated with alienation, apathy, and inability. We also anticipate each segment to be associated with alienation, apathy, and inability to various extents, helping to identify the primary reasons for their non-participation. And so, as mentioned, the main focus of the research is to explore youth non-participation in political processes. We define non-participation as not being registered to vote, or have not participated in past elections, or being unlikely to vote. IRI will explore kind of three primary drivers, including apathy, alienation, and inability. We define inability as those who might otherwise be participatory, if not for structural, organizational, and individual barriers. We define alienation as a sense of estrangement from the country's politics, and we define apathy as a lack of desire to take interest in politics. And so this is kind of an ongoing project with pilot initiatives that are ongoing, but basically the plan that IRI, the plan for the research is that IRI will conduct youth political participation surveys in target countries, use advanced data analysis using linear regression cluster analysis to better understand the factors behind youth political passivity and identify typologies of those who are politically passive or apathetic, can be engaged and persuaded to participate in political processes. Using the identified typologies of political passive youth, conduct pilot initiatives with local civil society organizations to deliver messages and content tailored specifically to them, similar to modern consumer product marketing, political advertising, or voter registration campaigns. And so with that, I will turn it over to my colleagues, but happy to answer any questions about IRI's work across Asia or our research project.
Thank you. My name is Korvi Rakshand. I'm from Bangladesh. The organization that I'm representing is called JAAGO Foundation. JAAGO means wake up in Bangla, Hindi, Urdu. When we started the organization, our idea was to not make it an organization, rather a movement in Bangladesh by some young people, because we did not have so many youth organizations at that time. If you look at the statistics in Asia right now, we have 750 million, more than 750 million young people. In Bangladesh, 21% of the population is youth, and where we are going through a demographic dividend. The number of young people are increasing. The space of political expression, freedom of speech is decreasing. Youth's passion and energy brings inspiration and hope for the future. However, we often say that young people are not interested, but why are they not interested? We usually don't talk to young people. Youth are seen, but not heard, and not part of decision-making process. You will often see them getting invited, but their voices are never heard. Lack of political space for youth to get involved locally, regionally, and globally. If you look at the statistics of Asia also, 2 out of 3 countries do not consult with young people as part of the process of the national development or their political parties. Today is a very interesting day because we have so many young people, so many representatives from so many countries. So I would like to request that we often tend to attend these programs, we discuss, but can we create a platform to connect all these young people in Asia? Maybe it's digitally, at least to learn about what they're doing in their own country. So when we say that, yes, young people weren't involved, but in Bangladesh, if you look at in 1952, we're the only country in the entire world who fought for their language. UNESCO recognized it and make it the International Mother Language Day. The birth of Bangladesh in 1971 was led by young people. In 1990, democracy was established in Bangladesh. We didn't have the voting right. There was an army regime. It was led by young people. So there are examples of situations that was led by young people. Even, and these were the political movements, even non-political movements in 2018, the student protest, which was organized by school students who were 14, 15 years old because their colleagues, their friends were killed on the street. In 2022, we have seen Sri Lanka. 2022, we have seen the anti-abortion movement in United States. If you go to, particularly in Bangladesh right now, what is the situation? Due to the lack of freedom of speech and different laws and regulations that have been set up to stop the freedom of speech, you won't see a lot of participation by young people right now. The only place where you see is the student wing. So there are 2 parties mainly in Bangladesh, and both of them have very strong political wings. But the frustration among the political wings of the student wings of the political parties are the lack of decentralization of the political system. Youth often fail to raise their voice. Maybe they have joined because they have the interest, but they're never asked about anything. It's always the other way around, not from the bottom of the pyramid, but the opposite. So these are some of the major problems that we have seen, the frustration of young people. But young people did not stop there. So for example, organizations like us, when we see that we cannot express ourselves, we have set up small dialogues with the political parties, trying to convince them. So rather than activism, it has more become a part of the dialogues. So when young people were able to talk or do movements, they took the social media. They started expressing themselves in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And that is when a very strong act, the Digital Security Act, was established in Bangladesh. When it was getting established, it was often told that this is to stop the fake news, but that became a very strong weapon for the law agencies and the government to stop any sort of anti-government communication. So people were arrested. We have seen a lot of brutality on activism. Just a small news cutting. Amnesty urged government to release girl detained just to have a post on Facebook. Bangladesh journalists arrested to charge under Digital Security Act. Digital Security Act cases filed mostly out of political motivation. So this is exactly what is happening. So any sort of activism or even expression on social media is completely stopped. So few things that we have been trying to do is, as I said, When I was 21 years old, we set up this organization with 7 of my friends. And when we opened it, it was not about politics, but when we were able to attract more than 50,000 young people in every district in Bangladesh, and they wanted to create a consortium where we can work together, we can talk together. As an organization, what we are doing is right now, because we cannot express ourselves on the streets or on the social media, we are organizing small trainings for young people on captivating youth with civic knowledge, good governance, encouraging them to practice their rights to vote through mobilizing all our volunteers, which, as I said, right now is 50,000, arranging dialogues with youth and political parties. We have done a youth perception survey, which we were never able to release. It was told not to, but at least we were able to hand it over to the government and the opposition party so they can understand the perception of young people. We have practiced democracy scorecard analysis, civic education on voter rights. So we hope that the conversation that have started will break the silence and encourage the youth, because the decreasing level of youth participation in politics not only endangers the quality of leadership, but also jeopardize the democracy of tomorrow. This is just in short. If you guys have any questions about our work in details, we can definitely go through. Thank you.
Korvi, now we'll go to Jason to discuss Malaysia.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Morning, everyone. My name is Jason. I'm from Architects at Diversity Malaysia. My co-founder there, we are an organization that primarily runs youth programs for diversity, inclusion, and political education in Malaysia. And with RI today, we actually run a project called Undi 100, or Undi 100%, which translates to Vote 100, which aspires to get 100% of youth voter turnout in the upcoming general election. That's obviously an aspiration, but part of our project does to do with political education, as well as how do we connect youth with political stakeholders for greater engagement. What I'm going to share about you today is I'm going to share some context of Malaysia. It's been a very dizzying past 2 years, 3 years, with having 3 prime ministers in the last 3 years itself. We'll share a bit about survey findings, primarily how do youth plan to engage with the political system, especially in the upcoming year, as well as some lessons and observations that I think we can apply quite broadly to democracy in Asia. I think this is especially helpful if you're a critical observer of Malaysia, as our elections may happen very soon, as you may have seen some recent news of our former prime minister going to prison in the past few days. First, some context behind Malaysian politics. This slide's a bit cut off, but in March 2020, as COVID was happening, a sort of pseudo coup happened where the 60-year ruling Barisan National government was returned to government after the 2018 elections, following some MP defection. So we saw a new premiership. So this was the first switch of prime ministers that happened in March 2020, followed by, you could say, mismanagement of COVID policies, as well as various other scandals that ultimately resulted in large protests happening in 2021, where more specifically was caused by mismanagement of COVID from a state election that was triggered by the then ruling government. We saw mass protests happen primarily in youth. And I think it's great to mention that these are primarily youth that have never protested before. I myself have not voted before, and I was there in protest. And so these kind of first generation of voters and first generation of protesters, you could say. And this is in the peak of COVID, where you could say this was very much a peak of youth expression within the political system at a very difficult time. Shortly after that, the prime minister resigned, and a ceasefire occurred between political parties due to the political instability in the time. Right now, what we're seeing is we see 3 corner fights between the ruling Barisan National government, their partners, the Perikatan Nasional or PN parties, as well as the opposition, formerly 2-year government, the Pakatan Harapan government. If this is confusing for you, it most certainly is, because imagine if you were a youth in Malaysia in this particular time, how would you even navigate all this considering the COVID circumstances that were taking place at the same time? So I think the crucial question I want to answer in my short presentation today is, where is youth in the political mess at the moment? Two crucial developments in the past few years. One is that we've had a bill called Undi 18 or Vote 18, which is essentially, one, it lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. We were one of the few countries that our voting age was not 18 yet. And it also implemented automatic voter registration, which introduced millions of new voters into the system. That this has only happened in January. So we had a recent state election way back in March. That was the first time that 18 to 20-year-olds participated within an election. The second thing is that because there are new and old political parties that are navigating different coalitions, that are navigating infighting and conflicts within their own internal parties, this has caused us also a lot of confusion. So a very brute way to kind of describe this, our circumstance at the moment, is sort of a market inefficiency. On the one hand, we have a lot of new consumers or new voters, which are very eager to vote but unsure. At the same time, we also have very unclear products or unattractive products, i.e. political parties at the moment. And so how do we disentangle this? I think a large hesitation that we had, especially when emphasizing more youth within the Malaysian political system, was the fear that Malaysian youth were political apathetic or politically uninformed at the time. And so what we did with RI was we ran a survey. It's called the Youth Aspiration Manifesto survey, where we surveyed over 3,000 youth in Malaysia using a nationally representative sample. This is done primarily to measure policy opinions, as well as cover as much ground as possible as to do with political attitudes during a particular time. This survey was done in March when we were having the state election at that time. Some findings to share is that number one, when we asked if you have voted before, clearly most youth in Malaysia have not voted, given that elections, the last one is in 2018, which is some time ago, where 55% of our youth surveyed have not voted, which lines up. However, the encouraging number, I think it's interesting to note, is that 80% of the youth that we surveyed wanted to vote in the upcoming general election. And I think let's hold this number here at 80%. We also asked, if you had to vote today, who would you vote for? And this number was at 41% of youth were not sure who to vote for, with many other coalitions receiving kind of equal or neck-to-neck race after that. What this draws from this is that it kind of overturns an assumption where, rather to say that youth don't plan to vote at all, or youth are completely uninterested in the political system, rather, this is a case where they want to vote, but they are unsure on who to vote for. And among the 41% who were not sure who to vote for, 73% of those still intended to vote anyway. So how do we make sense of these numbers, especially in the context of what the youth want in Malaysia? On one hand, when we surveyed them according to policy items, we included around 20 to 30 policy items that they could rank agreeing with, and how ranked important were they compared to other policy items. What we found is that no matter we threw in very new, old, very template, at the same time contemporary policy items, three things returned that were most important and were ranked most agreeable among youth as well. One being housing, the second being minimum wage, or we could say that as a more signal for cost of living, and the third thing is public healthcare. Versus say other things like freedom of speech, or even the death penalty, or drug policies. These were ranked quite less important for youth. And so, this is an unsurprising story given the circumstance of COVID and the socioeconomic difficulties that were brought about. But I want to paint this picture where this trifecta of socioeconomic policies is still the most important among youth, regardless of political affiliation in Malaysia, regardless of race, regardless of age, and regardless of geography. So there is a large demand for some form of economic vision for Malaysia at present stance. However, are the options available, are they sufficiently pleasing? In one survey that was conducted by RI, it was a three-pronged survey, happened in 2020, 2021, and then 2022. What we see here is that for many youth in particular want to see more political options in Malaysia, with many youth demanding or interested to see more new political parties on the table. And so I think a brief picture that we can see here is that not only are there consumers, i.e. voters, who are eager to vote, but they're also very clear in what they want to vote for. And but at the same time, there are no good options on the table. So what does this tell us of Malaysia's political scene, and how does it reflect political engagement of youth today? One thing is that for many much youth expression, you could say, what do you do if there are no products that you like in this case? One, you can ask for better products. There have been many protests, albeit that they have not received the same amount of traction that they had before. Or number two, you can also go out and create your own product. Malaysia is one of the few countries where we have seen a youth political party form. At the same time, this youth political party is largely concentrated in support in the central region and urban areas. So the question still lies, can these alternatives sell something that is equally attractive and new for youth participation, to incentivize youth participation within the political system? The second thing is to do with economic instability. Many figures in our survey, including many other surveys that have corroborated our findings, demonstrate that many youth are turning to familiarity as economic threat is heightened. We have Barisan Nasional, the 60-year-long ruling coalition from before, being the top choice among youth, as well as winning in quite large landslides in the past few state elections. So at the same time, while there are great youth demands to see socioeconomic vision, that vision of stability, the narrative, the rhetoric of stability has been one that's proven to be advantageous, to be pleasing, as well as to be advantageous for ruling coalitions in that case. Other parties try, but the question is, are they as successful, or are they sufficiently responding to youth expression in this particular case? The last thing I want to say is that the distrust in the political system currently runs deep. After the 2020, where we saw many political betrayals happen, on top of information overload and the lack of differentiation among parties, how do youth properly engage in the system and are incentivized to express, to create their demands and air out their aspirations, is a question to be heard in the upcoming general elections as we move along. So finally, I think I want to end on a note that I think Malaysia's system of freedom of expression has largely improved, albeit we have seen arrests in the past year. But social media has greatly empowered youth to take their own voice. I think the question is, what continues to incentivize this voicing out if people on the other receiving end of those in power are not in a position or not responding to these modes of expression sufficiently? And so with that, I'd like to end. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Jason will now go to you.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Thanks to the hosting organization, and thanks IRI for inviting me here. Thank you all for having me here. So on the topic of on the topic of youth and political expression, I would like to share the case in Taiwan as a Taiwanese youth and as well as a researcher in Doublethink Lab. So I will first introduce where I work, Doublethink Lab, a bit, then cut into the youth political participation in Taiwan. And with that context, I will move to the project we work with Steve. And if there's still some time left, I would like to talk about the situation of information overload. Okay. So yes, I'm Chen Yunru, and I'm a researcher in Doublethink Lab. I was born in 1993. Here's my email, and feel free to contact me. So I work in Doublethink Lab. Doublethink Lab is an NGO based in Taiwan. Our work focuses on researching malign influence operations as well as disinformation campaigns. So we adopt different approaches doing so. For example, digital intelligence team focuses on the computational tools to identify malign actors, and a social engagement team where I work focus on the consumers of this information. And of course, since we are in Taiwan facing the threat from China, so a global research team collaborates with stakeholders worldwide to analyze China's influence. And here I want to show you one of our flagship project, China Index. It measures China's influence in over 30 countries in different sectors, such as domestic politics, foreign policy, media, etc. And as you can see on the screen, Taiwan has the highest score in media sector. It means that the media environment in Taiwan is highly influenced by China and authoritarian country. So some of our media, they adopt self-censorship or only report in a way that favors China. And what I want to show here is how freedom of speech and political expression, political engagement can be suppressed in not only in an authoritarian country. Their influence can go beyond national borders. So even that the situation in Taiwan can be slightly better than other countries in the region, we still need to be aware of this. So I work in social engagement team. Our work focused on the disinformation's consumer, and we research on who is more vulnerable, and we developed a counter narrative to engage them to reduce the harm from disinformation. Yes, today I'll be focusing on the youth political engagement in Taiwan, and I would like to start with this big picture. So according to a recent survey, 86% of the youth respondents say they are likely to vote in the next national election. And given that the total turnout rate was around 76%, I believe we can say that the political participation for youth in Taiwan is relatively high in terms of voting. But why is that? So yes, of course, we need to talk about the cross-strait relations when we come into Taiwan situation. So yes, Beijing government have never give up to take control of Taiwan using force if necessary. So there are thousands of missiles aiming our land, and Taiwanese people have been facing this threat for decades. And not only militarily, but also China suppressed Taiwan in many international arena. For example, our athletes cannot use our own national flags. We are not a member of World Health Organization nor United Nations. So that is the international background of Taiwan, but since 1970. But as Pei shared yesterday, that we were going through a process of democratization in 1970s. And here the photo on the right is the funeral of Chen who set himself on fire in support of freedom of speech. And thanks to him and other activists, Taiwan has been democratized. The martial law was lifted in 1987, and we have direct presidential election, and the first peaceful transition of power took place in 2000. And after that, I believe we can say that Taiwan is a democratic country. So now you can see there's a tension within me and my generation who grow up and being educated in the 21st century. That is, on the one hand, we are being suppressed by an authoritarian country, but on the other hand, we are fully aware of our freedom and rights in a democratic country. So it is quite spontaneously for us to support the Taiwan independence. So our generation is called the generation of organic independence, 天然独 in Chinese. So on the screen, you can see in the left is a photo of the Sunflower Movement. That is a movement led by young students in protest against a trade agreement favoring China. And yes, on the right, you can see the photo with the woman have a poster that saying that she support the youth should support Tsai Ing-wen. So DPP led by Tsai Ing-wen then successfully transform our hope to keep away from China into the support for land. So shortly after the Sunflower Movement in 2016, President Tsai won the election, and yeah, and she remained in power now. So you can see that our anxiety and worrisome about the cross-strait relations have been eased by voting for a party that promised to protect our country and sovereignty. So this is kind of good thing because this gives us a strong motivation to vote. But I believe it's not to other kind of political engagement. Public issues other than cross-strait relations are not having enough attention. So I believe it is still important to enhancing youth engagement in Taiwan. And yes, for that, I would like to talk about the project we work with Steve to enhance youth political engagement with social media and ads. And Steve have already talked about the methodology of this project, so I will focus it on the case in Taiwan. Yes, so these are the three local organizations we work with in Taiwan. They focuses on different public issues. What Doublethink Lab did is to facilitate the discussion on setting the target audience and developing strategy to engage them and running the ads campaign on Facebook. So during the 1 month of campaign time, each organization reached about 1.5 million Facebook account on average. And in the case of the Taiwan Youth Association for Democracy on the left, half of the reach was not aware of there's a constitutional amendment of lowering the citizenship age limitation. It means that the social media and ads do help us to reach people who are politically passive. However, we found while conducting the project is that there's a polarization on engagement. What we saw is that youth care less about politics, rarely have any relevant news on their news feeds, thanks to social media and their algorithm. So, and on the other hand, people who care about politics, they are enthusiastic and know many details. So it kind of creates a barrier of participating in public issues. Therefore, reaching out to those who are passive are getting more and more difficult. So we believe that standing in their shoes is critical. Then, to engage those who are passive, we'll need to emphasize what they care about, what interests them, and meet them where they are at. And during conducting the project, we found out that youth activists did better in emphasizing with their peers. So consequently, organizations that are led by the youth and work for the youth are essential when it comes to enhancing youth political participation. So before I stop, I will just quickly touch on the situation of information overload. Yes, so we found in a recent interview that facing overwhelming information online can become a serious mental burden for the audience. And to ease the burden, some people might develop a strategy to avoid information to cope. So, however, this lack of information might further erode the interest and ability in political engagement. So, what I'm suggesting here is while reaching out via the internet is convenient and efficient, we should be aware of worsening the situation of information overload and avoidance. And also, getting people's attention is quite different from persuading and incentivize them to participate and to care about politics. So I believe we should not give up on the offline engagement. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you all for listening. Yes.
Not sure. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, Steve, Korvi, Jason, and Yunju. We can go to the audience for any questions. I can begin with a question probably directed, maybe more toward Korvi and Steve, though potentially relevant to Malaysia and Taiwan, but I'm interested in this intersection of apathy versus fear, right? So youth who are afraid to participate can look apathetic. And I'm just wondering, Steve, from our research perspective, is there a way to get at that? And Korvi, maybe if you can talk a little bit about how that dynamic works in Bangladesh.
Yeah, I think, speaking specifically, looking at the research, it's hard to gauge that, right? It's hard to gauge if there's a difference between fear and apathy. Obviously, it's something we're aware of, and I think that's why it's really important in the research that we do, that we cooperate with civil society organizations on the ground. And then, as was mentioned in the previous presentation about the importance of, while online engagement is important, kind of the in-person engagement. And I think we get a better sense of kind of what the sentiment is on the ground when we do some of that in-person engagement. And so I would kind of say two things. It's hard to tell from the research, but I think what's really important as part of this, as we go from research to implementation, is about the relationship with civil society organizations on the ground. And then keeping in mind that while kind of outreach digitally is great, there's still an important role for in-person activities and in-person engagement.
I believe that if we really want more engagement of young people, yes, there will be apathy, there will be fear, but are we actually talking to them, engaging to them, not in just numbers or inviting them in programs, but are we listening to them? Are we putting them in the driving seat rather than just the passenger seat? Are we allowing them to take decisions? Are we allowing them to think? I think that is very important. And also the encouragement, and this doesn't has to be only from the law enforcement or the political parties. Even if you look at the families, are they encouraging these young people? Every father and mother, you will hear that you don't have to go, someone else will do it. Your elder brothers and sisters will also say that. So that education, I think, is very, very important. So in one hand, yes, we are only talking with the political parties, but I think it starts from education institutions to home. And I think that will actually encourage young people. Thank you.
Questions from the floor, please.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. In the beginning, when the preface of the entire project was being set up, there was a remark around not treating youth as a homogeneous group. And all three presentations kind of did exactly that, spoke of youth in one broad stroke. I would like to hear from the panelists how do they reflect on this tension between smaller groups within the youth and developing something that is more universal in nature? What does the evidence say? Thank you.
Yes, that is a good question. And yes, of course, we are aware of that. We shouldn't treat the youth as a whole. And in our project, we do target the different aspects of different groups of youth. And of course, different groups of youth focuses and cares about different things. And we are trying to engage them and trying to get their attention with different ads materials. For example, we have to cut the video length when we post on the Facebook. That's because people might not be so interested in the video that in maybe 3 minutes and explain the issue in detail, but they can have like 10 seconds to watch a video, and maybe at least 10 seconds have the maybe pads and that interest certain groups of the youth. So yeah, I really appreciate the question. And yes, I do. I mean, in our project, we do focus on the different aspect, different interests of them, but maybe we do not emphasize that in my presentation. Yeah.
Steve, I was gonna go to Steve, and then I think the other guys.
I'm interested to hear from them. I think we didn't go into kind of all the details of the project, but from IRI side, there's kind of a capacity building aspect of this. This is something we've seen with civil society organizations that we work generally, not commenting on the work of the panel, but just when we look at our 13 offices across Asia, we do a lot of youth outreach, is just this really building the capacity of civil society to be able to communicate with target audiences. And so there is kind of, as part of the research project, also a capacity building component.
Yeah, maybe Jason and Korvi, if you would reflect on the kind of segmentation here, like what differences in public opinion do we see between men and women, between marginalized groups and mainstream groups within youth?
See, I don't completely agree that we have to see youth in different from different angles. There can be different interventions, because already there's so many divide and rule games. If you also want to divide youth on, oh, this is, you're from this religion or your gender or social economic background, I think youth as a whole should be seen by one, their voice should be one. There can be different interventions, there can be different ways to make them understand. When we go in our programs, when we go to work with the indigenous group, definitely we talk about their rights. When we're in the urban areas, it's there. But I think it's very important that we connect this youth and don't create more divisions in them.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's a very keen, descriptive observation. I didn't present the differences per se because for a lot of our findings, I've done around 3 national surveys in the past few years. A lot of the times, for policy issues more specifically, youth are oftentimes actually quite more similar to their older peers of similar, if you cut demographics the same way more, say, compared to their peers. But the reason I presented the few items I did is because the structural issues facing youth are the ones that are similar. So one, that being of economic disenfranchisement, and that's why the policy issues and ranks priorities are quite similar in that case. But I think across the board as well, the kinds of representation and ways of participation and the barriers to say for youth are across the board similar. For example, in the case of Malaysia, I think those who've come before me and a lot of human rights defenders have very much successfully broken a lot of the challenges that have come before. But at the same time, now that youth are kind of knocking at the doorstep of political participation and to become indirectly in politics, is there enough space being carved out for them? And so that's literally a structural issue in that case. So that trickles down from, I guess, from youth representatives all the way down to youth as a general category. And I think that's what's so uniquely special about youth. But I kind of want to echo what you just said about the way we engage youth, because the way youth are disenfranchised was quite distinct from the way older people view politics. For example, in Malaysia, especially in one of the slides just now I showed, older Malaysians were quite stable with their political options. I mean, it's the way they express themselves and the way they find the means to demand are already quite stable versus, say, youth. Those options are a lot more flexible. They're still more volatile and changing. So that's, I think, quite crucial, especially if you're interested in intervening in a direction of democracy. Are there appropriate avenues provided for youth in these particular contexts?
Okay, my name is Jude Henilo from the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. So my university, before COVID, did a study with Action Aid and the British Council about the youth of Bangladesh. So findings are, most of them want to leave the country, but they want to do something for the country. They really hate politics and they don't want to get engaged in it. And their top issue is about unemployment. But then if you look at Bangladeshi society and of recent periods, it's really the youth that are voicing out disgust with government. So they have engaged in a lot of protest action, such as road safety, quota movement, Shahabag movement. These have been described as being sporadic, loose, unsustained, and very emotional. But my question is, what kind of political engagement of the youth does JAAGO envision for Bangladesh? I have a second question for Chen Yunju, because you mentioned about information overload. So my question is about what information is getting out there to the youth regarding the journey towards democracy of Taiwan, considering that the KMT is still a powerful force and they may have their own version of history, and that the heroes and martyrs that you are claiming now could be made into villains in the near future, depending on the information that's getting to the youth?
Thank you. Definitely, we can talk on Bangladesh even after this session. But in short, just to answer your question, JAAGO is a non-political organization, but one of our focus is to encourage young people to go into politics. But this doesn't have to be only standing for elections, but there are also other ways, starting from voting to raising your voice. So JAAGO is established in every district in Bangladesh, and our work is to train all these people, not only in Dhaka, but every district in Bangladesh. So training young people on different sort of election and democratic rights is something that we focus on, not directly into politics. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, and I believe the situation can, again, thanks to the social media and their algorithm, creating a lot of information bubbles within every society, and of course in Taiwan as well. And I do believe there are some groups of people, some groups of youth that are getting information from maybe KMT, maybe China. And yes, they are immersing in those information and hence having a different reality with maybe many other of their peers. So I believe that is also a critical point that why we need to have the way to engage those who are not engaging with us with social media and ads, and as well as maybe on the traditional media and also offline engagement.
Other questions from the floor? Please, over here in the corner.
Good morning. My name is Marcus Brand. I'm the head of program of International IDEA in Myanmar. And I wanted to thank you all for this very interesting panel and the good presentations. I have a question and a suggestion. Obviously, from my background in Myanmar, I want to raise Myanmar and the role youth and the youth movement play there in defending themselves against a very real threat to democracy. And I wanted to suggest that the youth movement that has really exploded into the public sphere in Myanmar in a way that very few had expected even 2 years ago, and played a very positive role in basically keeping awake the dream of democracy in Myanmar, how they could learn from your experiences in Taiwan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and other countries, and connect with youth movements, because I actually agree that as diverse as societies are and contexts are, there is a lot of common interests and a lot of common features in the problems that youth movements face. And so I wanted to ask you whether you have had any experiences working with Myanmar youth organizations, youth movement, and whether you would be interested to do so, because in that case, me and also Steve and others would probably be happy to connect, to make the right connections. Thank you.
Steve, did you have any reflections on that? And then we can go to the individual, to the others.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything you say, Marcus. I think, prior to the coup, we had kind of ongoing youth programs where we were engaging with kind of youth across the region. It's become a bit more complicated since the coup, just with digital security and other things. I think we're always looking for opportunities to make kind of connections happen. One of the, I mentioned in my opening remark that, we have moved our Myanmar programming to Taipei. And one of the goals of the Institute generally, while, the purpose of opening our office in Taipei is to really bring kind of Taiwanese expertise and Taiwan experience to our programs, not only across Asia, but globally. And so we think that there are important lessons to be learned from Taiwan's experience. And so just as an example, that is something, that we're focused on, but agree with you, would be happy to find opportunities to connect youth across the region.
Yunju, Korvi, Jason, how much do you and your organizations engage with youth in other countries or Myanmar specifically, and what could that engagement look like?
Particularly in Bangladesh, there's a mixed feeling, especially after the million Rohingyas came. So there's always two sides of the story, but from our organizational point of view, definitely there's a way, because our organization, it's a youth-led organization. Most of the volunteers that we say, the 50,000, are unpaid, which makes it scalable of that number. We have tried helped India and Pakistan set up similar models in their own names. So if we can connect with the young people there, not just a civil society organization, but the genuine young people, we can give that model, we can train them. It's an organic model, less expensive, easier to scale. So we're happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. As for Doublethink Lab, I believe we haven't had the direct experience working with youth in Myanmar. We, however, have some experience having workshops in the region. So I guess some participants are from Myanmar, but not particularly youth. So yes, of course, we will be happy to learn from them and about the speech regulations in there, and maybe learn from there to build more capacity in the region. Yeah.
Yeah, so with my organization, we don't work internationally. We're very young, only 3 years, and we only operate nationally. But I think something you said, I think helped me reflect a bit. Was about there's a burst explosion of youth participation, and what's the lesson from that? Malaysia had this kind of burst a while ago, especially with the corruption protests that happened during 2015 or so. The irony was that when we were organizing, or at least my peers were organizing the protest in 2021, a lot of the youth organizers had to relearn a lot of things. And so I think just the only thing I can mention is that information transfer was probably super crucial. That was something Malaysia at least is suffering just a bit now, especially given that there's kind of a jump from youth generation to youth generation when one generation kind of moves on into other things in life, that all the benefits and advantages gained might have been lost without that transfer.
Great. I saw a hand here. Yes.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Sukunti. I'm from Cambodia Center for Independent Media, and thank you for the panelists. I would like to ask a question to Stefan. It related to the activity of the Cambodians, like currently that the rest of the Cambodians activists, they are more and more active. It related to promote freedom of expression, to promote the environmental activity, and also the democracy in Cambodia. Before, IRI very active to provide the training, capacities building for the youths. And what is the IRI representative, it already mentioned, that means the activity, it work very active with the others youth in the other regional countries like Thailand, Myanmar, and other. And how about Cambodia? Do you have any plan that to strengthen the capacities building for the youth group that they are active to promote freedom of expression and to promote the environmental activists in Cambodia or something like that? Because that means they can bring them together at the regional level to ensure that they have some of the regional organizations and some of the regional network can support them. Like currently in Cambodia, the youth, only the CSO that we are working to promote the freedom of expression and the human rights, or the media tries to help them. But the regional organization, what I noticed that there means less support from them when they face the challenges, the threat, or the legal harassments by the government. And for the government, they also have create the other youth group. Led by the Prime Minister's son, they try to manage the youth from the high school to the university student, even those at the communities level. Yeah, thank you.
Steve, do you want to reflect on our Cambodia work and others in Southeast Asia?
Okay. What I can tell you is that IRI does have ongoing programs in Cambodia. Obviously, we don't have an office there anymore. We don't have an expat, on the ground there. And so everything's run remotely from Washington, D.C., but there are ongoing programs. To be honest, I don't know the details of those programs, but would be happy to kind of follow up with you after. I can find out, but I don't have specific information on what those activities are. I do know, just given, as you know, over the past several years, it's become quite difficult for international organizations to operate in Cambodia. And so I know there are, both implementation challenges, and just logistical challenges, but happy to kind of follow up with you on specific activities.
Other questions from the floor? James, did I see your hand up earlier? Oh, well, actually, yeah, you go for it.
I just wanted to kind of sort of pull out the issue of disinformation across the projects, and then maybe just to sort of circle back to Jason in the case of Malaysia. With Undi 18, more youths going to the polls generally, how much disinformation is targeted at youth? Does your project look into it? And how much of that, contributes to the issue of integrity into the political process that, youth may feel, and hence, leading to alienation. I just want to put in a plug here. Asia Center will release a report on youth and disinformation in Malaysia on the 8th of September and its impact on electoral integrity in the country. So I also wanted to just mention, to echo Sukuntia earlier, the Raoul Wallenberg Institute is here with us as a panel partner from Cambodia. They have a panel of youth researchers here looking at freedom of expression, and I think we can also hear a lot from them tomorrow on this topic. So thank you.
So, do you want to reflect on this question of disinformation? Maybe just,
yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. And I think we did not look into disinformation specifically into this for, mainly because it's policy issues, but from observations from other projects, one, at least from a non-research standpoint, and I think I've also heard some, qualitative research that demonstrates that those in Malaysia, at least for electoral disinformation, are typically those who are of 65 and above who are affected typically by WhatsApp disinformation rather than, say, social media disinformation. So I think there are different kinds of disinformation, and different groups are more vulnerable to different kinds. The ones that are a lot more explicit, perhaps I would say older generations are more affected. Architects of Diversity, one of the state elections ago, we ran a monitoring campaign on social media that looked at politicians' social media that use race and religion as an electoral card. That obviously, part of that was disinformation. So looking at existing strategies of political parties that use race and religion as rhetoric, and then how does disinformation factor into that? And I think that's where youth are particularly vulnerable, where we found multiple sources of political output that relied on disinformation, but specifically political disinformation, such that other parties embedded in race and religion to particularly cater to youth demographics. This was on TikTok, this is on Twitter, this is Instagram, not typical, of Facebook per se, but other channels. And so disinformation is an issue, but I think thankfully that we have the kind of infrastructure or public discourse to counter that as of now. It's a very thin one, I think, in observation, but I think some layer of countering is there. Whether it's fast enough or not is a different question.
Hello. Yes, for the disinformation and its impact on election. Yes, we observed that the disinformation and information operation from China targeting Taiwan. Maybe in 2018 they are promoting like the good image of China, but then they found out that the youth just don't buy it. So they started to questioning whether the US will help Taiwan if there is China waging a war. And is Japan really a friend of Taiwan? And so that is the kind of disinformation they are spreading now in Taiwan to like sowing the seeds of distrust. And it is really, really impactful because the last time our CEO went to a university and he's like asking the college students who is spreading disinformation in Taiwan. Half of them say China and half of them say the US and Japan. So that is quite concerning for us because why do they think that that is the obviously they are targeted by a certain kind of disinformation that in the maybe not in the university. If we're not in the university, we cannot see it. So yes, we do believe that the disinformation sowing the distrust and disengagement in the society and to the election is concerning in Taiwan. Yeah.
So disinformation and fake news have been a big problem in Bangladesh. It went to extent where there have been riots, mainly religious attacks. It went to that extent that the government had to actually make a law and make sure that they can govern what people are writing. The sad part is that that same law is now getting used against anything that goes against the government. So it was supposed to be something that was good, but it has become a weapon for the law enforcement agencies to arrest people whenever they want. So it's scary when we talk about what should we do about disinformation. The solution becomes the problem itself.
I saw a hand in the middle here.
Yeah, hi, this is Dirga. I work in Myanmar. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Since yesterday we have been talking about youth participations, and activism in advancing freedom of expression, right? And also this morning we talked about the aspiration and motivation. What I did not hear is about the protection, because when we talk about activism in a compounding crisis, it entails risk, right? And we need to address as a civil society, at the same time. What is your experience and reflections on mitigating the risk around the youth activism, political activism, how best we can protect these activists, because we're talking about their lives. We have recent example from Myanmar, the execution of 4 activists and politicians, right? And until and unless we do not mitigate that risk, it's highly unlikely that we will fall into the self-censorship, and again the suppression of freedom of expression. So it would be really helpful to hear from your experience.
Steve, maybe you can reflect on that generally, and then I imagine Korvi will go to you because it's relevant to Bangladesh.
Okay. I will talk specifically about Myanmar, given that your work there, and I can talk a little bit about kind of mitigations that we're trying to take. Obviously, it's a very insecure environment. We're working, IRA, we tried to kind of holistically work with the pro-democracy movement. So grassroots organizations up to kind of political leaders of the movement. Kind of since the coup, we've really focused on digital security. A lot of the work that we're doing is virtual. Just the fact that people are, kind of spread out. And so, really working kind of on operational security and making sure that that's integrated into all of our programming. We think that's extremely important. We also, as part of our programming and with support from USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, we've been really allowed flexibility to include kind of emergency support services as part of our projects. And so this includes safe houses, this includes stipends for things like communication, transportation, healthcare, and then also working with groups on the ground on psychosocial support. And so really trying to have guardrails around our programming that we can be responsive when issues arise of security of our beneficiaries.
So when we started our work, it was directly activism. For 7-8 years, it was directly protesting, doing constructive criticism. But in 2014, after the government came, we realized that we can't do that, but we cannot stop. So the other ways that we took was, as I mentioned, is rather than attacking, if we can talk to them, that's also a way to motivate them, to make them understand. And also, why do they hate youth, if I say, like, because especially the law enforcement agencies, they're like, both of them hate each other. Like the young people will hate the police will hate the young people. So we took different strategies. Like on Valentine's Day, we went to the police station with red roses, giving them, and the first time they were shocked, what is happening? But yes, every year doing that just created a nice relationship with those people. So now when we go on the protest, the police are like, they probably won't arrest us, but they won't let us stand. Coexisting is very important. So we got all these young leaders from different political parties in one room, sitting with young people, showing the example of coexistence. So those were our strategies. We cannot do those protests like we did before, but we are not stopping. We're just taking other routes. So that's our way of doing a bit of protection while we're protesting.
Other questions from the floor? I can ask a question to Yunju. I think you mentioned very high youth voter turnout in Taiwan, which I think is potentially a unique dynamic in Asia. It certainly puts America to shame, where we have very low voter turnout. I know Bangladesh has been quite low. I can't speak to Malaysia, but I'm wondering, what is the cause of that, right? Is it a political culture question? Is it political parties that are responsive to youth? Why do we see so many youth turning out in Taiwan?
Hello. Yes, I believe for this question, one thing is of course, the cross-strait relations, because we have the tension I mentioned earlier in my presentation that we would like to keep away from China, and one party, that is DPP. DPP was founded in support of Taiwan independence. So yes, of course, they are a reason of us to come out to vote. And I believe another reason is for some more liberal policy, they are promoting like the same-sex marriage, and of course the housing policy they are promoting. They kind of really touch the pain point of the youth in Taiwan. So I believe that is some part of question for a question.
And a question for Jason. You mentioned that youth are interested in more political options, potentially a new political party. I think we see that in polling in other countries, but often there are just significant barriers to smaller new parties to succeed. So what is the likelihood of a new party or a new option emerging in Malaysia that could be more responsive to youth?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so I think just context, the new political party, or its name Muda, or in Malay translates to young. It literally just translates to young, is the party that contested, say, 7 seats in the last state election, but only won one. Fair enough that they were very tough seats. A big portion of why there's such a large barrier to entry for both young political parties as well as political candidates is that there's incumbency bias is so strong in these seats. And these are parties that have legacy seats. So for example, MPs or members of parliaments or state legislatures who have been in there for 4 or 5 election cycles. And that's really long. And so because that there's incumbency there, it's very difficult for them. They need to die first or retire with full grace in order for that seat to become vacant. And so at the point which you have a bottleneck where there are only so many seats and there are so many people vying for the seats, and allocating seats is a form of distribution of power to maintain power within the political party itself. Even young candidates within very strong political parties find it difficult to get seats. What more for them to negotiate and give allocations to a new political party demanding, say, X seat? In the case where, because we have the first past the post system, in the case where a new political party comes in, the splitting of the vote will produce really unclear results. So for example, in March, we had a recent seat that saw 5 large coalitions fighting it out. And this is kind of new, in many ways refreshing for Malaysian democracy. But whether or not that produces appropriate outcomes, I think is a different question. And it looks like because of our systemic issues with first past the post, it doesn't seem to effectively challenge the incumbency at present. But secondly, what is then going to happen when they do lose? Malaysia's had a history of new political parties emerging, dying, emerging and dying. But has that really effectively challenged the status quo or create structural changes is still yet to be seen. And I think that's perhaps one of the more interesting points and plots that it's very much an experiment in democracy in many ways.
If there are no more questions from the floor, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much for all of your engagement this morning.